Welcome to the Martial Arts and Life with United States Martial Art Hall of Fame member, nationally board-certified life coach, and multi-award-winning author, Chris Wilder.
Hey, welcome to Martial Arts and Life. I hope your day is going well, everything is coming together as it should, and that you're having a good tea time too, because what's a day without a good tea time? Little different format today. We've got Alain Burrese with me here. And some of you know Alain and some of you don't know Alain. For those of you who do, this is going to be interesting and it's going to add to your world. For those of you who are not familiar with Alain, you're going to find this absolutely, utterly fascinating. Alain, what? We've known each other for 10 years?
At least that.
Yeah. And one of the things that is significant about what Alain does is that he does survive a shooting. We're going to talk about that because we just came out of 2 back-to-back seminars yesterday. It was fascinating. So I said, Alain, please come on the podcast. It's usually a little bit of a different flavor, more monologue, more of that kind of conversation. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. So Alain, I'm not going to try to give your resume. I'm going to let you cliff note it because you've done it 100 million times in all the audiences that you've appeared, all the way from Virginia to Washington to Texas to Canada, talking about surviving an active shooter. Alain, go ahead and hit us with your resume.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate you having me on. In a nutshell, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been studying martial arts since the 80s in high school. Spent time in the military with the 82nd Airborne Division, jumping out of planes. Went over to the 2nd ID where I was a scout sniper and then worked as an instructor at the Scout Sniper School there at the 2nd Infantry Division. After that, I got my bachelor's degree, went back to Asia to further my study in martial arts, which includes Hapkido, which is the primary art that I continue to study and teach today. Went to law school, didn't like playing lawyer, so I wanted to do more writing and teaching. I was teaching effective communication classes to deal with potential conflict, try to prevent and de-escalate situations. I was teaching Hapkido classes, and then I was teaching safety and self-defense classes when the Aurora shooting happened. And people were saying, Alain, you teach this stuff. What do we do in these situations? And it was after the Aurora shooting that I really switched focus and started working on what can we do to help people survive these terrible incidents, which the FBI statistics show have been increasing over the last couple decades. And that's what I'm doing today. I travel around the country. I still teach effective communication classes and de-escalation classes. I teach Reflex Protect defensive spray classes. But the ones that are most popular are the survive a shooting, the active shooter response classes where I can teach ordinary civilians what to do in these terrible events.
Let's take something that's a little bit off the field, than what most of us would think about in regard to an active shooter. But I think before we do that, I'd like you to explain the difference between an active shooter and their goals and say, a burglar or a carjacker. What's the differentiation there?
Certainly. And we use active shooter because that's sort of the buzzword. It's the key word that everybody uses. Active killer is actually more accurate. It's not always firearms.
Right.
We saw Canada recently, a guy with a knife. And so...
Oh, yeah, in Saskatchewan.
An active killer is different from your other criminal because a guy walks up to you and points a gun at your head or puts a knife to your throat and says, give me your wallet, give me your car keys. Give them what they want, you go home safe. Mm-hmm. An active shooter, active killer, they want a body count. It's not pointing a gun at you and saying, give me your keys, give me your wallet. It's pointing a gun at you and pulling the trigger and killing you. That's all they want is a high body count rather than a robbery or a kidnapping or some other type of crime. And that's why the strategies have to be a little different. It's not just give them what they want and go home safe. It's you have to keep yourself alive because what they want is you dead. And they're killing people randomly. It's not like somebody specifically looking for an individual to kill. They're going to places where there's a large group of people and they want a high body count. They don't care who it is. And so that's, the definition of active killer that sets it apart from other criminal activity.
So it's not a disgruntled husband showing up at the business and shooting his soon-to-be ex and then going out into the parking lot and shooting himself. This is a mentality of simple, how many people can I kill?
It isn't. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah. No, please do.
When we look at statistics and they talk about mass shootings, we have to be careful because when they define mass shootings, it's 4 or more. Now, they will say have a mass shooting, a gang fight, an inner city gang fight shooting each other. That's not an active shooter situation. That's, gang rivalries killing each other, but they'll sometimes still put it as a mass shooting because a number of people shot. And that's a whole different strategy of keeping yourself safe. Don't join a gang, don't go into gang neighborhoods when they're feuding with each other. We'll keep you safe. The active killer, they're picking movie theaters, supermarkets, Walmarts, hospitals, schools, where just regular, ordinary, innocent people are, and they're shooting innocent people that with no real connection to them other than they were in the group and the bodies count that they were looking for.
What I want to do is I want to go just a little sideways here because we're recording this just outside of Spokane, Washington in the United States. And the Fairchild Air Force Base is just adjacent to Spokane. There was an active shooter that took place there several years ago, and there was was Andy Brown a military police officer, or was he, do you remember what his...
He was with the Air Force. So he was an Air Force police officer because the shooting happened at the Fairchild Air Force Base Hospital.
Right. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is because the preamble is significant in regard to how people should see the world. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to talk about the Andy Brown and his successful defense of not only military personnel, but civilians. And then I want to talk about that pre-shooting indicator. I think this is a great way to lead into one of the things that I think is so significant because prevention is worth a pound of cure. And there should have been that prevention on this case. But I've teased it enough. Would you go through that?
Sure. We know this because Andy Brown wrote an excellent book, and it's Unheeded Warnings, I believe is the title of that book. And it is about all the warning signs that were present with that individual before the day he took the weapons to the hospital and started killing people. And again, Andy just happened to be the first officer on scene, and he stopped the shooter by killing him. Andy also writes in that book what it did to him having to kill someone. He had some psychological effects, and it took him a while to get over that. Writing the book helped him through that. And the book actually is dual. It talks about the active shooter, but he also writes about the pilot that crashed a B-52 about that same time period in the early 90s. And there were a lot of warning signs about that pilot. So the book really covers warning signs in some two different incidents that could have been prevented if people would have paid attention.
I just want to take a moment, and for those people that probably wouldn't be aware of this, a Fairchild Air Force Base pilot crashed a B-52 bomber on the base. I don't know if he was but anyway, it was on the base. And I remember it happening. Doing something as insane as I think, wasn't he doing like a barrel roll or a corkscrew or something with a B-52 bomber?
He was pushing it to the limits, and I forget exactly. It's been a while since I read the book, but I remember when that plane went down because I was in Thompson Falls, Montana, not too far away. My dad was retired Air Force at the time, and when he saw the news clipping, my dad's first comment was, that was the pilot's fault. And it was pilot error. He was doing things with the aircraft that he shouldn't have been, pressing the limits, and he had a history of that kind of behavior. And again, there were tons of warning signs. I mean, there were people that didn't want to fly with this guy because of the stuff he did. It was preventable. Just like that active killer situation, there were so many warning signs. But instead of getting the guy help and doing this, he was sort of shuffled around because, he's not in my command anymore. I don't have to worry about it.
I believe this to be true. You can tell me because you're more familiar with the case. The guy who was the shooter, not the pilot, that's a whole different thing, but the active shooter the active killer on Fairchild Air Force Base before he was taken down by Andy Brown, had a long history of psychological problems, inabilities to function with other people, inappropriate behavior. And his mother intervened on several occasions as an advocate to keep him in the military because she thought it was going to be a good thing for him, and placed his potential well-being above that of the military service. Did I get that right?
I believe so. And it's been a while since I've read that book, so I don't have all the specifics right on the tip of my tongue, but that is accurate. And Andy goes into detail, and he did extensive research on this individual. And again, there's so many times where the intervention to keep him in the military, but we'll keep him in the military, but we'll pass him along and put him somewhere else, so he's not my problem anymore. And that's just, instead of getting the guy the help and taking care of it, they let him go. They didn't pay attention to the warnings, and a lot of innocent people died that day.
Well, of course, the question becomes, gee, Alan, can you give me the top 10 warning signs I should be aware? Because everything is a list these days, right? It's the top 10 warning signs or 7 ways to know that you're... Okay, look, I'm going to go on a rant, okay? It's like a Cosmo magazine cover. It's, 7 ways to keep your husband happy, 3 ways to lose those hard to lose pounds before summer. So what I want you to do is I want you to give me, the top 10 tips to find out if your lover is a serial killer or something of that sort. What are the things that we should be looking for? And maybe it's the story of the girl that you told last night, the story of the girl with the diary. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the girl with the diary made national news a number of years ago. You may remember it was out east. The father found the diary where she was writing. She wanted to be the first female active shooter. She wouldn't have been. We've had females. She wanted a higher body count than a certain other killer. The important thing about that is when the father found the diary, took action, got that young lady help, and before she took a gun to the school. Other things that we look for, and these are pretty much compiled by the FBI. The FBI has the best database on these killings that we can look at for information to try to prevent future ones. Development of a personal grievance often is associated. Inappropriate, acquisition of firearms. It's not just going and buying a new hunting rifle and going to the range, zeroing it in. It's, buying extra weapons, maybe inappropriate range behavior. There's a book out there I read that talked about the Virginia Tech killer who had been seen practicing at the range shooting under desks. That's not normal range behavior. But, nobody talked about it until after the killing when they went and interviewed people and, they're doing that. An inappropriate acquisition of explosives, maybe learning how to do homemade bombs, IEDs, has been common. An inappropriate, interest and fascination with previous killers. We see some of these killers researching others so they can outdo them, or they learn from them. They figure the Virginia Tech killer and chain the doors, preventing the law enforcement from getting in quicker because they had to go back and get breaching tools to get in while he was killing people upstairs. They figure he got that idea from the Amish schoolhouse killing when the guy boarded himself in, preventing the police getting in while he's doing terrible things to little girls. So they learn from each other. And then also a big common thing, Chris, that, the FBI has compiled with some of this is a real or perceived personal loss. And that can be a death in the family, a breakup, a divorce, losing a job. And then when you see a few of these things combined, okay, that guy just got fired. He's spending all his time buying guns, learning how to make explosives, and he's researching all these killers. Maybe we should look into this and get this guy some help before he takes all these guns he's buying to the local mall and starts killing people. We have to look at that stuff, especially when we have several together. Try to get these people help, whether it's mental health intervention, law enforcement intervention, both, but try to stop these killings before they start.
The thing is that people don't want to be, most reasonable people, in my experience, are kind of a live and let live. I'm not going to get involved sort of thing, unless you're impinging on my way of life or my good name or stealing from me. I mean, most people are kind of just go along, get along. It's like, oh, my neighbor's a little odd, but it's not anything that is disturbing. I'll share you this story. A good friend of mine has a guy who lives in the house across the street from him, and the dude actually sleeps in an army cot beside the house, rain, well, it does not make any difference. I've been there in the morning and watched him wake up and break the snow castle off of the top of him. Why he does it, we don't know. No one's ever really bothered to ask. But in the 10 years that my cousin has lived across the street from this guy, that's what he's done. And he's never done anything else that seems to be odd. Now, why that is, we don't know. But we're not calling the police on it. Now, if it started being coupled with a few other things, like screaming and yelling fights or things like that, or cars peeling out and a thermonuclear device being built in the backyard, we would tell somebody. But we don't want to be the odd person out when we're in a group. But sometimes it's our responsibility. Where do you find that line, Alan? Where do you find that line where you're not necessarily invading in somebody's right, but you're using your judgment to say, it's time to speak to somebody about this who can take action and potentially investigate or resolve it? It's such a soft area. How do you shape that?
I think, as you said, it's extremely difficult. And part of it is, we have to listen to our intuition and our feelings. Sometimes we know something's just not right. And we need to listen to that feeling. We don't know. And again, like you, I don't want to be calling the police on every little thing. Oh my gosh, the guy who was researching, he looked at the article about an active shooter. I got to call the police on him because he might turn into one. No, that's ridiculous. But when you start getting a lot of these signs, and we know that there's just something not right with the guy, that's where we need to sort of pay more attention. Because you're right, people don't pay attention and people let people do whatever. I remember right after the Las Vegas shooting, terrible. When he was in a hotel shooting down at the concert.
Oh, yeah.
I'm traveling out to Virginia, checking into a hotel, and I had just heard on the news about hotels were warning about people. And I'm traveling, you saw the big giant rifle case I had yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
I'm traveling with this rifle case, checking into hotels, thinking, people are going to be asking me, that's going to make people scared. They're going to be nervous. They're going to wonder. I'm going to have to show them that I'm an instructor and their training materials. Nobody ever said anything. And this is right after that horrific shooting where the guy's in a hotel with all the rifle cases and the weapons. People didn't pay me anything. I actually took the train from the airport in Seattle downtown. There's that.
Oh, yeah.
And then it was 2 blocks from my hotel where I was staying at the Hilton one time doing some training. So I walked from that train station to the Hilton with that rifle case. It has wheels so I can pull it. I'm walking downtown Seattle with a big rifle case. Nobody pays attention. So people don't pay attention to things, which we need to pay more attention to keep ourselves safe. But at the same time, we don't want to get over it. I'm glad nobody was calling the police on me every block, because then I'd be, no, it's training weapons. I'm an instructor, sir. Here's my business card. You can look at them if you want. Yeah, people do ignore stuff, and we need to maybe pay a little bit more attention and not ignore things, because it's been going on for a long time, but it's undoubtedly increasing. We have the FBI statistics to show that. And so we need to be proactive and do things to keep ourselves safe.
Before we go on with that, I wanted to take a moment and share some contact information with the listeners out there. To get a hold of you, they can find you on Facebook at Survive a Shooting. It's that simple, Survive a Shooting. You can also find Alan on LinkedIn and Twitter. And the way that he spells his name, now pay attention, folks, there will be a test. It's Alain, and here you go. And for you people who are French, you'll be okay. The rest of us won't be. It's Burrese. That's Burrese. Alan, tell me I got that right.
And I'll tell you a funny story, because I get a lot of Miss Elaine because people don't know that French spelling.
Yeah.
But, mutual friend of ours, Wim Demir, Mark McYoung.
Oh, yeah.
Both, friends of both of ours, both internationally known authors in the self-defense world. Mark was, and I only knew Wim at that time through email. We hadn't met face to face yet.
Mm-hmm.
Mark was over in Belgium where Wim was, and all of a sudden Wim stopped him and said, "You keep talking about this Alan like I know who you're talking about." And Mark's like, "Yeah, Alan, ex-sniper, Hapkido guy, Montana." And Wim's like, Alan. He speaks French. He always saw the name in writing and did the French pronunciation. And Mark was, I go by Alan here in America. So when Wim and I met face to face, he told me that story and stuff. But that name has confused people for a long time.
But here's the beautiful part: is once you have it, and you can't confuse him with anybody else. It's not like you're looking up Tom Jackson, the former defensive back for the Denver Broncos, or possibly the guy who lives down the street 4 doors. Yeah. Before we go too much further, I want to hit one last thing on the public show before we shift over to the Patreon part of the show. But I wanted to touch base and talk about the environmental awareness. Something significant happened in the courses that you did. Of course, the material was fundamentally the same, a few changes here and there to suit the audience and the time and so forth. But you did these 2 back-to-back classes. And one of the most significant things that came out of there was when you started talking about environmental awareness. And I want you to share that, if you would, with the listeners about those 2 versions of environmental awareness and the one that seems to always get overlooked.
Certainly, Kristen. And a lot of us in the self-defense safety industry talk about situational awareness. It is important. It's key to keeping yourself safe. And I like to use Colonel Cooper's first original simple color code: white, yellow, orange, red. When we're paying attention to things around us, I want us to live in yellow. Pay attention. You see all the good things in life, you see the potential bad. Then you can prepare yourself in orange and red to respond. And a lot of people teach that. What a lot of people don't teach is I take it one step further. After we've talked about paying attention to our surroundings and everything, I ask people, what else should you be paying attention to? What else do you have to be aware of?
And at this point, it's utter silence. This is the thing that I thought was significant.
Exactly. Everybody's sitting there thinking, what am I going to be aware of? He already covered almost everything, right? And the thing I want people to be aware of that people don't think about is they have to be aware of themselves and how their actions are affecting their safety. Because we can do things in the exact same place, and depending on how we act, that's going to result in if we're safe or not. And I always, in the classes, I'll use a real exaggerated example of going into a bar with Hell's Angels, because I've done that. They've had rallies in Missoula before, and it's no big deal. They're just people, right? So we go into a bar, you can get along just fine. I know their reputation. I know what they've done to earn that reputation. No problem. I'll still go in and have a drink with them, say hello. I've done that, been there, right? However, I tell people, how healthy would it be for me to go into that same bar filled with Hell's Angels, jump up on a table, and yell anyone wearing black leather that rides a Harley is an idiot, and throw in a bunch of swear words to really emphasize the fact? Same location, same people. The only thing different is my behavior and how I act, which is going to affect if I go home that night or go to the hospital. So we have to be aware of our behaviors and what we are doing that affects our safety, just as much as we have to be aware of everything going on around us that affects our safety.
Well, Alan, on that note, what I'm going to do is we're going to say goodbye to the public show. And we're going to shift on to the private show, which is over on Patreon. Chris Wilder, KrisWilder. Alan, you and I feel compelled to have our names spelled oddly and difficult. So, which is a great thing to have happen. But again, for those of you who are not going to join us over on Patreon, you can reach Alan on Facebook at Survive a Shooting. You can also find him on LinkedIn if you'd like, and that's just LinkedIn, of course, and it's ALAINBURRESE. I want to tell you that I've been through his training now twice. And in both instances, I learned something new because the dynamic of the audience changes. And that changes the information that comes out to some degree. The core elements, of course, the same, but unique, helpful, useful. And I want to say something here that I think is truly significant. I was talking to one of the women last night after we'd finished, and she said, "This wasn't scary. This wasn't scary." And I said, "I don't understand what what do you mean?" She goes, "I thought this was just going to be boom, you're dead, boom, you're dead, boom, you're dead." And she said it wasn't about that at all. It was actually quite empowering because now she felt that she had tools that she could use that were simple and effective, not crazy things, but simple, effective tools. And a lot of it was in her mind and not necessarily in her physicality. I thought that was an interesting statement. I commend your work to everybody. Listen to what that young woman had to say in regard to the experience there. Look Alan up. You're not going to be disappointed at all. Churches, businesses, hospitals, municipalities. Did I hit everything?
Schools are a big one.
Schools, of course, are a big one too. You've done some universities as well. Absolutely phenomenal. You need to check it out. Go check out Alan's stuff. For those of you who are on the public stream, we're going to leave you now. We're going to go over to the Patreon side. Want to thank you for being here. Appreciate the listen. As always, be well and keep the path.